Hello, I am C. Paul Singh, President Nisbet. A very good evening, and thank you all for joining us at the 120 edition of our international webinar. Today's webinar, as you know, is on relationship between business and leadership strategies. As you know, it's being hosted by Nisbat. I extend a very warm and hearty welcome to all of you who are here, particularly to our eminent speakers. I'm sure that the delegates who have come to join us from various countries shall enjoy the deliberations and would carry home many important points from these deliberations. Let me introduce Nisbat in a few words. National Institute of Security, Safety, Management and Applied Technology was established in the year 1990. It started training courses in the field of private security, safety, then management and applied technology. We also conducted courses for the Ministry of Defense, Government of India, to equip the retired Defense Forces personnel for their second career in the private security industry. Nisbat now aspires to become the foremost corporate training institute and a think tank organization in the field of security and safety. It has started the process of creating a research cell for security professionals and students and scholars. Nisbat has established 4 important wings to undertake specific activities. Nisbat Forum is organizing webinars, seminars, conferences, interaction programs, debates, speeches by scholars, and eminent personality. The second one, that is the Nisbat Academy or Nisbat Education. This will conduct virtual training programs, assessments, certification, etc. Nisbat Enterprises, the third segment, will undertake audits and verifications in the field of security, safety, and applied technology, and establish partnership and alliances wherever required. The fourth one, that is the Nisbat Foundation. We intend to undertake welfare and social work under a trust for the society at large and particular reference to security and safety. This is a very brief about Nisbat. Let me introduce to you the moderator cum chairman of Nisbat. Captain Pawan Ahluwalia is the chairman of Ahluwalia Holding Company, which has offices at multiple locations in India and abroad. He took voluntary retirement from the parachute regiment of the Indian Army at a very young age and jumped into an unknown area of business. With his continuous perseverance, with his continuous hard work, by taking risks and at times learning from the pitfall, he has grown, he has evolved, and he has achieved a position of eminence in the business world today. He is humble but asks constant improvement in his business organization from all who are associated with him. A founder member of the International Business Research Association, Hong Kong, and also a member of World Association of Detectives. He is the past president and former chairman of Council of International Investigation, USA, and is the awardee of Malcolm Award and Kautilya Award by the Council of International Investigator. Shri Pavanjit Ahluwalia shall moderate this session. Let me say a few words on the subject of today's discussion. Now, today's discussion, as you know, is a relationship between business and leadership strategy. Now, what is a business strategy? A business strategy have to evolve by going into certain key steps of the business. The key steps involve the process of evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of the business company. It also involves control over the activities of the business. What is the mechanism of control? What is the methodology of control over the business activities which are going on? It also determines who should be allocated and made responsible for use of resources. What is the quantum of resources? How they have to be allocated? It also goes into that. Then business strategy as such includes a way to track out the entire company's output. A good business strategist should be, of course, having initiative. He should be, of course, sportive, but he has to be decisive also. It is not possible to devise and determine a business strategy for all types and all sizes. There's no one size fitting all strategy for the business. In general, business strategy can be first cost-oriented business strategy. That is variation of cost. You're already having a product. You want to vary the cost vis-a-vis the market, and you want to have that strategy where you want to give fillip to your organization or to your business. It can be also product differentiation strategy. You already have a product. You want to differentiate from the market. Your label is differently. You make sizes differently. You have some innovation. So there's a product-oriented or product differentiation strategy in the business. It can have also a merger and acquisition strategy. A leader strategist, a business leader may like to have mergers and acquisition. Now, the leadership strategy, I have told you, is the business strategy, I told you, is very difficult to define as such. Now, the relationship with leadership strategy and business strategy. The leadership strategy, as all of us know, most of us know, the leadership strategies of leadership styles. It is difficult to design or name one leadership style for any business growth. The authoritative style of leadership, the autocratic style of leadership, the democratic style of leadership, the laissez-faire style of leadership, the transactional style of leadership may not all of them suit independently for any business growth. This would require encouraging and recognizing the contribution by your members. Perhaps, according to me, the best leadership strategy for any business or enterprise could be to delegate trust and also empower your employees. The leader has to create a strong, functional pipeline of workers in the business, a functional pipeline of workers, and this leadership style can perhaps be termed, as I say, you may call it transformational leadership. It keeps in view the types of business, it keeps in view the business strategies and the growth of the business. The relationship between business and leadership strategies is to be understood for an intelligent and effective co-relationship actually between the business strategy and the leadership style to get the best result. This shall keep a businessman to stay ahead of other competitive business enterprises, irrespective of the size of the business. Thus, according to me, I feel that there is a deep relationship between business strategies and leadership strategies, and their relationship is of coherent. An intelligent, effective co-relationship, actually, I'll call a co-relationship, effective and intelligent between the business and the leadership style can give you best growth. However, I am nobody to tread into the realm to tread into field of these leaders or these scholars who have got more knowledge, a thorough knowledge on this subject. I will therefore leave rest of this thing to the speakers. With these words, I'll now request the moderator, Captain Ahluwalia, to take over the proceedings and carry it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sipal Singh. Very good introduction to the organization and to the business. We today have participants from the United States, India, Singapore, Italy, Nigeria, UAE, Finland, Oman, Pakistan, Philippines, Spain, and Tunisia. We are at the moment live on Zoom as well as on YouTube. And today's program has been sponsored by Premier Shield and is supported by Premier Consulting and Investigations Limited, Tag Scores, India Skills, and JMD Cargo. A word about the President. Mr. Sipal Singh is a Master's in English Literature and has served the Government of India as a very senior police officer in nearly all the states of the country. He has raised two important organizations for the government. One is the Rapid Action Force, and the other is the Internal Security Academy, which is a central police academy located in the city of Mount Abu in Rajasthan for the teaching to the senior bureaucrats on internal security matters. During his long career with the Government of India, he has been awarded and decorated with the President Police Medal for Distinguished Services, the Indian Police Medal for Meritorious Services, Police Special Duty Medal with VAR, a Sena Medal, and a number of other recommendations and commendations and rewards. After retirement, he was recognized for his services by the President of India in a conference as the Security Personality of the Year. He currently is an advisor to the Asian Professional Security Association, the Indian chapter. He is the Honorary Director General of the Central Association of Private Security Industry in India. Mr. Sipal's face is well known in the country as a dynamic security professional who has appeared in a number of interviews in the national television channels. I will now introduce the first speaker of the day, Mr. Karthik Raina. Karthik is an MBA from the Jamna Lal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies in Mumbai, India, with a specialization in sales and marketing. Karthik has a total working and consulting experience of 46 years. On the domestic front, he started his career with Procter & Gamble and spent 14 years with GSK Consumer Healthcare in various sales and marketing assignments. He ended up being the head of all India sales for GSK, along with country responsibility for Bangladesh. He thereafter moved to Dabur as General Manager Sales and Marketing with the task to professionalize the ways of working of the company. Having completed that, he was made in charge of the move to launch the new foods division as CEO of the foods business. Here he conceived the launch of brands like Real Fruit Juice, homemade range of cooking ingredients, lemonies, etc. Internationally, he has worked for Far East Mercantile Company in Nigeria, heading the consumer division. This included handling negotiation and purchase of stockfish, a dried form of fish, and then branding and selling it. For this, he regularly traveled to Iceland, Norway, the Faroe Islands, and Greenland. He has been the executive director of Hext West Africa in Nigeria. He concluded his international career in Colombo as the managing director of Unilever Best Foods, looking after Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Since 2005, he runs his own training and consulting company called Learning Facilitators, focusing in the areas of sales and channel management, go-to-market modeling, brand strategy, and rural marketing. He is closely involved with consulting and training assignments in India, Far East, China, and Africa. Karthik has been trained as a consultant and a trainer in the United Kingdom at the Guardian Business Services School in London, the SmithKline Beecham Training Academy, and with the Oxford Management Consultants. Karthik is visiting faculty at most of the management schools in India, including the IIM at Ahmedabad, the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, the SP Jain Global School of Management in their Mumbai, Sydney, and Dubai campuses, Singapore and Dubai campuses, and several other organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Karthik Raina.
Thank you, Pawan. Always feels nice to hear about the good things you've done. There are a hell of a lot of bad ones, which we will not, of course, talk about. Thank you for this opportunity. I must say it's a tremendous pleasure for me. And sometimes I think it's a bit of carrying codes to Newcastle with all of you with such eminent experiences in leadership. If I'm going to be talking about something, then it's like, talking to people who've done it all. But nevertheless, I'm going to put my 2 bits worth. What I'm going to do essentially is share a bit of my experiences, share a bit of my readings. Since I'm a professor of management, I have this experience of reading a lot and teaching in various locations. So I will share these experiences and I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation. But before I do that, I just wanted to introduce to you a very interesting experience I had. I remember I had just moved to Colombo as the managing director of Unilever Best Foods. And there was a welcome kind of a meeting at the Sri Lanka Institute of Management. And somebody asked me a question, said, sir, it must be very exciting because, you're the managing director and you must be like into strategy and every single day working on it. And my reaction was, listen, you can't be doing strategy every day. You got to learn that the strategy is also got to work in the marketplace. So people like us do formulate strategy, but we spend a lot of time making that strategy happen. And I think that's the important part, that strategy is meaningless unless it has happened. And today, when I'm going to be talking, then the subject that I am looking at, obviously it's the same one, but I have used a slightly different word in my case, which you'll now see on the screen. I've said on aligning business and leadership strategies. This is critical because you cannot have a business strategy that takes you to London and a leadership strategy that is oriented towards Tokyo. So I'm going to share some of my experiences in this particular area. According to my experience, there are 4 fundamental levers that improve the relationship, that enhance the relationship, and make sure that it contributes towards the organization achieving whatever is the desired outcome. The basic levers that people need to work on at the leadership level are culture, processes, structure, and technology. So I'm going to be talking a bit about these and sharing some of my experiences with each one of it. Let's start with the lever of culture. Now, I have found in my experience that exactly the same strategies in exactly the same market for 2 different organizations don't work the same way because the organizations are wired totally differently. And that's where culture comes to play a fairly major role. If we look at strategy and if we look at culture, a few things emerge. First and foremost, strategy is about, I think Pal Singh Saab mentioned this, it's about a formal logic for company goals and it orients the people around those goals. Culture, on the other hand, expresses goals through a series of values and a series of beliefs. Strategy relies on plans and sets of choices to mobilize people to do what needs to be done to make the thing work. Culture, on the other hand, guides the activity through shared assumptions and group norms. Thirdly, strategy provides a clarity and focus for collective action and decision making, whereas culture is a little more elusive. Much of it happens to be anchored in unspoken behaviors, mindsets, and social patterns. Now, what's important for us to understand is that if the culture is not contributing to the strategy, then the strategy will not take off. Or even if it takes off, it doesn't go as well as it is meant to go. So if we take this entire thing together, the question often is, where do we focus? I mean, do we keep on pushing strategy? Do we activate culture? How do we marry the two? And in this particular case, I would like to actually quote Peter Drucker. He says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. In my own experience, I have found, Pawan mentioned that I was working with Dabur, where it was a very standard, I wouldn't use the word unprofessional, but differently professional family organization, where a lot of informality existed, but systems, processes, etc., were absent. A lot of people operated on what I call gut feel, which is good, but very rarely balancing data along with that. And people were repeating the same things because they were not properly documented. The same mistakes were being made again and again. And one of the major contributions that I made to that organization was to put the systems in place and making sure that those processes were followed by the people. And that was the tough task. Designing the systems wasn't. The tough task was getting people to follow, because there was a culture in which people won't want to be constrained by methods and processes and systems, but rather wanted to just operate in an informal manner. And my biggest challenge was being able to manage that at two levels. One level was at making them understand it. And the second level was the kind of relationships they had with the family members who ran the Dabur business. Meant that they ran to them every other minute to get something done. And the key focus that I took was to make sure that they did not feel that this new system is going to shake them up or is going to make them become irrelevant. So it was an interesting challenge. And if I may just kind of make a balance, it was about 30% strategy and 70% managing the culture. So let's look at what a few other leaders have also used culture to integrate into their strategies. Let's talk of this gentleman I'm sure all of us recognize, Elon Musk. He uses the concept of learning. His entire culture is based on the principle of learning. And this is his statement. He says, I'm interested in things that change the world or that affect the future and wondrous new technology, where you see it and you're like, wow, how did that even happen? Now, if any of you have had the opportunity to visit one of the stores of Tesla, now, what is fascinating is Tesla stores are in malls. They are in major shopping areas and not far away like other car dealerships are. So you enter in, and when you enter, the first thing that they focus on is education, making you learn. And the second thing they do is create wonder and awe. And that really is where the entire culture process that Elon Musk has built is seeped into each and every person who does what I call the touch point with the customer. If we now move to another person, some of you may recognize him. He's a gentleman called John Mackey, who who started a chain of stores called Whole Foods. Whole Foods primarily focused on fresh and healthy stuff. And his point was that we have a focus. We are not here just to make money by selling product, but investing big time into purposeful products. So that's what he says. Most of the greatest companies in the world also have great purposes, having a deeper, more transcendental purpose to energize all the interdependent stakeholders. So if you go to any of these Whole Food stores in the US and you talk to the people, they look driven. They look as if they have a purpose in life. And I think that purpose is just like learning was for Tesla, providing that purpose was the big culture swing as far as Whole Foods was concerned. Coming closer home, we all have heard of Azim Bhai Premji. When he was asked, what does he think drives Wipro? He says, three ordinary things which many people don't pay attention to and which I believe drive all success: hard work, perseverance, and basic honesty. So simplicity is the culture lever that Azim Bhai Premji uses. And he's even carried that into this fabulous thing called the Azim Bhai Premji Foundation, which also runs the university. And it's amazing the kind of work that he's doing. But more importantly, it's amazing to see right from the teachers, even the peons, the cleaners, have this bit about my spot should be clean, my area should be free of trouble. And the teachers say, I will not just teach in class, but I will go out of my way to make the child comfortable. So there is a simplicity culture point that he takes forward, and that is what makes his organizations a great success. We then have another example of Disney, and I'm not talking of good old Walt Disney, I'm talking of Bob Iger. Bob Iger is a person who actually focused interestingly on his people and said, my people will focus on the customer. So Bob Iger had this amazing approach in which he would move around, make himself accessible, treat people very, very well, look them in the eye, as he says, and tell them what is in them on your mind. As a result of which the quality of the people that were working in Disney and their parks and their entertainment centers, even at this wonderful cruise ship that they have that goes off the coast of California, people were obviously enjoying themselves because they felt cared. You know, Pal Singh Sahab talked about empowerment. To me, empowerment, the first step of empowerment has to be to create a culture that cares. And when the people start doing that, your strategy, your business strategy works like a dot, because we often forget strategies may be conceived by leaders, but it is that person who on the spot is interacting with the customer who actually delivers the strategy. Okay, there's an interesting thing. There is a magazine called CEO Today, and I'm just read out what they have to say. It says it's been so heartening to see a new type of leader break through the ranks over the last decade. This is embodied by the rise of Indian leaders in the West, introducing the balance of hearts and minds philosophy, which is a central tenet of Indian culture into business. You guessed it right. He's talking of the three bigwigs, all in the IT business. Sundar Pichai, who looks after Google and now Alphabet. Satya Nadella, who's the big boss of Microsoft. And Arvind Krishna. All of these people, interestingly, have made huge cultural changes, but have driven fantastic performances through their entire organization. A classic example of intertwining of culture to deliver on the final strategy. Which brings me to the number 2 lever, and that is the lever of processes. I hinted about this when I talked about my experience in Dabur. But I just want to play a little kind of a not a game, but a little exercise with you. I'd like you to look at these two sentences very, very closely. If you notice, there are 6 words. Teacher said, John is a fool. And if you notice that in line 2, the same words have been put in the same order. So effectively, the content that is being delivered in these 2 sentences is identical. But it doesn't stop there. I would now like you to look at sentence 1 with this little how, the way of saying it. It says, teacher said, John is a fool. So we have the person talking is teacher, the fool is John. Now I've taken the same 6 words and look what it says in the next line. Teacher said John is a fool. Absolutely opposing meanings have come, not because of what was said, but the way it was said. And that is the strength of processes. Processes is not about the what of doing things, it is about the way things are done. And exactly the same thing done differently can lead to a huge difference in the outcome. And that's really what processes are. And if we carry this forward, right, then we must remember that leaders develop processes not for the sake of it, but to make it easier for their people to implement that elusive strategy. That business strategy needs to be implemented. And therefore, the criticality of the processes is to understand that dealers, when they focus on processes, leaders, when they focus on processes, they need to understand that they're doing it to make it easier for their people. Well, how does this kind of lead to a conviction? And I have a theory on this, which basically says that there are 3 steps to make a person think of implementing whatever strategy you have in mind. I call it the what, the why, and the how. And I believe any leader that concentrates and puts in place processes that address all 3 of these will be able to get a far greater level of success in implementation, for the simple reason that the what is about goals. It's about the clarification of goals. How well have you communicated the goals? Do people really know what is expected of them? And if they don't, is their confusion too expensive for you? You know, a very common thing a lot of you would have experienced is, oh, I didn't know that I was supposed to do this. Because people are not clear.
Karthik, you have another 3 minutes, please.
Yeah. The second is about the why, which is the ownership. If a person knows why he's doing something, he owns it. And the third is the how. And the how basically is to build the confidence. So processes are primarily to ensure that there is clarity, ownership, and confidence, right? Sun Tzu, which all of you are from the army, a lot of you would know about Sun Tzu very well. He says victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. So preparation is to harness that passion with a system of developing steps so that we can achieve the desired outcome. And that is how process works. Now, this is an example of my first company, which taught us how do you present a system. It was called the memo. And if you did not put up your presentation on the memo, it was never considered. So there is a standard process. And even today, whenever I design something, I follow this system. It's become part of world. Similarly, GSK has a thing called the devil's advocate. In the devil's advocate note, it says, what will go wrong with this strategy? And people think about that. Which then brings me to the third part, which is the structure. Linking structure with your strategy is a very key role that a leader plays. Whether it's hierarchical, project, matrix, any kind of a thing that is done. I'll here give you an example. My own nephew is the head of Microsoft Azure in Seattle. When he was a young kid, he was working on Windows 7. And he was heading one little part of that project. And Steve Ballmer, the CEO of the company, was reporting to him on that project. That's the project team-based culture. That's the project team focus through the structure that gets this result. Right? Which then brings me to the last part, which is technology. Technology, what kind of organization are you as a leader creating? How do people see you? Do they see you as a stagnant where there are holy grails and nothing is going to change? Do they see you as flirtatious with technology, change for change's sake? Do they see you as a tech child who loves to play with white elephants? Or do they see you as tech savvy? And depending on which part you come into, because we often look at the successes, what we forget is almost 97% of startups fail. 3% is what succeed. Similarly, in the area of data analytics and decision making, are you whimsical? Are you data ignorant? That means you just base everything on gut feel. Are you data dependent, where data is your new god? Or the more balanced data informed, where you blend your data as a leader? That is what you need to put in place. And that's when your decision making becomes critical. So what it does actually, the alignment of these things, right? It makes sure, first of all, that your passion, I'm on the last slide, Pavan. The passion doesn't become an obsession. Very important, because obsession takes you down the tube. Your disruption doesn't turn into destruction. A lot of organizations have faced that. The unreasonable, which people say is a good thing to do, doesn't become the unrealistic. The investment in future is not an investment in managerial ego. And most critical, empathy doesn't go down into sympathy. And I just want to close with one of my favorite Urdu shayars, Ustad Shudat Khan. He sings beautifully. You must listen to him one day. And he has one interesting line on empathy, which I think defines beautifully. He says, "Meri bezuban aankhon se gire jo chand qatre." मेरी बेजुबान आंखों से गिरे दो चंद कतरे, जो समझ सको तो आंसू, ना समझ सको तो पानी. And that, I think, defines the importance of empathy. So I've shared this little thing with you. I hope it was of some use to you. It was based on what I felt. And I just want to say thank you once again for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Pavan.
Thank you, Karthik. What a wonderful discourse you've given here. I'd like to now introduce James Grimshaw, who's the second speaker of the day. He speaks to us from Lincolnshire in the United Kingdom. James has worked with Garda World, which is one of the world's largest private equity backed, privately owned security services company, which has a turnover today of about 3.5 billion US dollars. His roles span from covering operational positions during business startup to being the managing director of international services, where he was responsible for growing the profit and loss in emerging and complex markets. He also led the strategy for developing an online travel security program. He led several acquisitions for Garda World in many geographies, primarily in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Africa. Prior to joining Garda World, James worked in a wide variety of spheres spanning military, civilian, and humanitarian sectors. In the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Europe, and Central Asia. He was involved in conflict resolutions and post-conflict reconstruction activities. He also worked with the United Nations Development Programme in creating circumstances for effective commencement of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration processes in northern Afghanistan. James Grimshaw was commissioned into the British Army in December of 1995, and he served in Europe, US, Middle East, before seeking retirement in 2001. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you James Grimshaw.
Great, thanks, Pawan, for that introduction, and thank you, Kartik, actually, for a very interesting sort of journey through the discussion topics today. And what I'm hoping to add to what Kartik explained is a little bit about my own experience, and as Pawan pointed out, my own experience in the last sort of 16 years. I guess from the first time I retired was with GardaWorld, and what I'm going to do is just go through a case study of that experience. And I'm going to try and do that. I'm just going to share some slides with you, and hopefully everybody can see those. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know GardaWorld, they are one of the largest now privately owned security companies operating across the globe, and they really are sort of built on three main pillars: one business out of Canada, the other one out of North America, and the third part of the pedestal really out of the Middle East and Africa. And it's this Middle East and Africa part of the business that I sat on the senior leadership team for. And this security business really operates traditional security services, so cash logistics, physical security of oil and gas operations, and embassies, so large infrastructure projects. And they've also more recently moved into the facilities management space, and I think to a certain extent higher up the value chain in terms of kind of consultancy practices, managing kidnap for ransom and travel security operations. But I think the key point for the purposes of this discussion is really the kind of the breadth of activity across the globe. And I think this is one of the greatest challenges that I'll come on to discuss, is how this organization imparts its will, its intent, and indeed its strategy across multiple time zones, multiple geographies. And in the context of that, I think the journey also, I think one of the key takeaways from the journey actually is the speed in which this organization grew from 1995 in its inception, which was born really out of a remortgaging of a house for $25,000 and buying into a small security company in sort of French Canada, so up in Montreal, and that organization grew rapidly until really 2003, when the business then floated on TSX, which is the Toronto Stock Exchange. And then the organization moved into the aviation side of the world, so pre-board screening, and then moving into the international space, which is where the business that I was part of was acquired by Garda. And then in the space of just over 12 years, we've grown from an annual run rate of about $600,000 to 1.2 billion. And that journey was really fueled on the back of access to the markets through, as I mentioned, the Toronto Stock Exchange. But 2012, I think the view was, post the issues of 2008, the view was that the markets just didn't have the appetite for a business like Garda. And so the business went private again in 2012. And I think Pawan referred to private equity, and it was really private equity that then pushed the trajectory of this business over the next few years till 2018. Here, obviously, there's some years beyond this, but we've basically gone in the space of not many over sort of 25 years. We've gone from a startup on the back of $25,000 to over a $3 billion business. a colossal growth. And it comes as no surprise then, really, when you think about what their strategy was, and it was absolutely all about that single word. And growth was very much in the DNA of the founder of this business, and I think he would have talked openly about being the biggest security company on the planet, probably since the inception back in 1995. But nobody really took that seriously until in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, where the business has grown to the scale that it has, and went after G4S. And I think this the cult of personality is a very important factor in the ability to be able to grow a business this quickly, and we'll come on to that in a second. So there are some considerable challenges with growth, and this is the transition between the kind of headline statement from the CEO, the founder, the person that owns and runs the baby, and then communicating that into the practical application. And this, with the business is growing so quickly across multiple jurisdictions, this is where the well, to coin a phrase, the rubber hits the road. And how do you really ensure that your vision is being communicated, right down to the 100,000 staff that you might have operating across all of these countries? And so we took a view to be able to do just what I said, which was imparting the will of leadership right down to project level. There are different approaches to this, and I think taking G4S as an example, they have a slightly more kind of franchised approach, I think, to their business model, which creates a very different culture, I think, and dynamic. Our view at Garda was that we really wanted to build the DNA that had grown in the leadership right the way down into every part of the business. Culturally, as you can imagine, you can read sort of academic journals about culture, and you can experience it yourself, but I have not experienced the challenges of culture quite so much until being in a leadership team boardroom where you've got British businesses, American, French that have been acquired, Italian partners, German partners, acquisitions in Africa, acquisitions in Southeast Asia, and you might all be talking the same language, but you have absolutely very different cultures and methodologies of how to operate. And I think it's foolish to underestimate the challenge of how you knit together organizations which might be delivering the same service, but they have very different cultural methodologies of how they do communicate and work together and motivate each other. It's that is a huge undertaking. And I think another area that is a huge challenge with this exponential growth is through acquisition, because whilst we had, I think, ambitions to grow organically, many of the markets were in sort of single-digit growth trajectories, and that just did not meet with the expectation and the ambition of the leadership. And so the only way to deliver on that is through inorganic growth, and with a very aggressive M&A trajectory. And that with it brought many of the challenges that Kartik mentioned earlier in his presentation about process, and we'll come on to how Garda kind of navigated some of these processes. And I think the other issue or challenge with growth is naturally sort of access to capital. And I think a business like Garda really has had a very strong sort of tailwind with regard to access to cheap money, and it's very difficult unless you're, a huge cash generative organization to be able to, grow on the scale that Garda has without access to, low interest rate lending. And it was only through, I think, the agility and ability of the leadership back in 2008 that we were able to kind of navigate some of those huge challenges with banks really, calling in on their lending, yes, managing to convince them that actually Garda was a bet that was worth taking it in the long run. So, with that as a backdrop, and the backdrop being, aggressive ambition to grow, mainly through a sort of acquisitive growth in, the main jurisdictions, quite frankly, of North and South America. Northern America, and the other major jurisdiction of being sort of Middle East and Africa. Now, how did we get around that? And I think one of the issues about culture that Kartik mentioned and that we experienced was it's very easy when you're in the startup and you're at the $25,000 stage, or as we were, there were a small knit group that was acquired by Garda in 2007, who were incidentally called the Wolf Pack, actually, because everybody had the same work ethic, the same view of where the business was going, and you had proximity to your project, so you were able to relatively easily impart your will on individuals. And it was a real cult, that sort of startup mentality. But how do you spread that when the organization is growing to the scale that I've just described? And I think this is where you need, absolute, clarity of direction, and a relatively small, leadership team that is able to, communicate, with clarity, right down to the sort of practical, project level of an organization. And how we did that really was through the very diligent, some might say sort of protracted and over administrative recruitment process. But actually, in my view, we spent a very deliberate amount of time ensuring that we were trying to bring people into our organization. And this again jives with, I think, something that Kartik mentioned in his presentation about what we actually wanted to recruit was a work ethic. We actually wanted to recruit people with the same values. We wanted to recruit a culture, and we didn't just want somebody that could do the job. Doing the job bit was actually the relatively simple thing that you could be, training people, so long as they came with that the work ethic and the values and the culture that we thought would knit with our culture. Then the easiest bit to change is the ability to perform the function. The more complex bit to change is somebody's work ethic. I mean, they have grown up with that work ethic. It isn't something that they're going to turn off and turn on whilst they're in your organization. So, whilst we took an inordinate amount of time over recruiting, the key personalities within the org structure to allow it to grow, it gave huge dividends, because actually the numbers of people that we had to change out were very small, because we chose them correctly in the first place. Now, in terms of leadership structure, as the organization grows, we need to take a view on how that structure is going to support delivering the leadership strategy. And we took a view that actually we need to sort of push P&L responsibility as far down the organization as possible to build, I think, fundamentally a kind of sense of ownership in the business. So, business owners weren't sitting in an ivory tower somewhere in the United States or in Montreal or in London. they were physically located close to where services and projects were being delivered, close to clients, so clients were able to get reasonably swift turnaround to decisions, and they weren't having to wait for decisions to go back to a headquarters with the challenge of time zones, and that, I think, really allowed us, once we had that structure in place, to be able to then use that structure to really communicate right the way down the organization. And there was a heavy reliance on communication, and I'll come on to the reporting structures of how we delivered that. But we really needed to invest in these relationships. We couldn't, steer the ship from this from a distant headquarters. We needed to have, headquarters located, close enough to where our clients were receiving services, and we were delivering them. But quite frankly, on a personal level, it was a very heavy, travel schedule. But actually, the value that it brought to the business was, immeasurable in comparison to the amount of, pain that it took for the individuals that were having to get on, aircraft and spend time out, seeing and understanding the business. And it paid dividends, not only in terms of relationships with the teams, but it also gave you a level of understanding so that you could be really critical when it came to assessing the performance of each business unit. It's very difficult for a leader further down the organization to be able to bluff their case on the numbers every month if you really have a very solid understanding of the key drivers of each business unit, how those businesses are operating, what are the challenges of it. And that then makes the dynamic between there's certain layers of leadership really engaging and adding value, rather than it being just a sort of a process of listening to somebody speak without having the knowledge to be able to challenge the very words which are being spoken. Now, reporting, Garda probably sort of got into a culture of over-reporting potentially, but I think the point here was to make sure that you were building a sense of accountability across all of those 45 countries. So projects would be reporting up to sort of regional headquarters in terms of their financial performance and key challenges which were potentially impacting them over the next reporting period, and those numbers would then be feeding up into the organization. And really what drove this reporting was an annual sort of budgeting process. And some could say that Garda was almost a private equity business that also provided security services. It was all about the numbers, maybe more than some of our clients would have liked, actually. But it just created a sense of financial rigor within the organization.
James,
And sorry,
just another 3 minutes for you.
Okay. But it built this kind of sense of accountability, which I think is absolutely critical all the way through. We also had this process of monthly management meetings. So those monthly numbers were reported up to each divisional headquarters, and all leadership basically got in the same room, and it was a gloves off meeting where you were able to critically analyze each other's performance across the business, and it really created this kind of a unity of purpose. And then I put this thing in here called the dentist call with the CEO, because it was like sitting in the dentist chair where the CEO, because he knew each business inside out, was able to pick out areas of performance that you might not want to have been quite so sort of forthright with coming forward on, but actually he knew the business well enough to be able to be critical, so that he could expose where there were threats to his growth ambition. And then back to Kartik and processes. We used our processes not only just to build a better business so that we were managing out inefficiencies, but it also gave us the framework in order to be able to integrate new acquisitions. These new acquisitions weren't able to just continue operating in the manner in which they had been operating. We gave them basically a Bible to follow and adjust to then operate in the same way that we were operating. And I think also what we also paid a lot of attention to was branding. So uniforms, colours, language of how Garda operated, so that we were building this the culture of Garda rather than the kind of languishing culture of whichever organisation had been acquired. And so on some of the positive side of things, this was like living in an MBA case study, quite frankly, being in this organisation that was just growing so quickly. And what it did do was grow fantastic shareholder value, and the experience itself, much like some of maybe being in a Google that's growing 30% year on year. This was, as I mentioned, an MBA case study, and to come away with the experience of that journey is hugely invaluable. Some of the things I kind of reflect on and miss to a certain extent is that cult of startup. Trying to recreate that or maintain that actually when you get to a $3 billion business is a huge challenge. And it's all about making sure you are critically selecting the right quality of leadership at the right level. Ownership, I think I mentioned actually, but on the negative side of things, the cult of personality can be it can be something that is hugely motivating for the right individual, but equally for some people it can be hugely destructive. And with this trajectory of huge growth, I wouldn't suggest that there weren't any casualties along the way, because I think there was a culture of sort of creating some negative friction. Positive friction is good because you're sort of getting the best out of people, but sometimes you can cross the Rubicon and it becomes somewhat negative.
In 60 seconds.
Okay, and then from an ownership perspective, ownership I think is hugely important. But if I can just tell a story very, very quickly at the end of my last 30 seconds or whatever it is, there's this, the boss is sitting in the office and he's got his arm around the new employee, and he says to the new employee, you see that house up on the hill, that big house, it's got a swimming pool and it's got a tennis court. He said, well, if you work really hard, you come into the office every day early and you leave late at night, then maybe one day I will own that house. So in summary then, a huge colossal growth trajectory, 25,000 to 3 billion in 26 years. It wasn't without its casualties, but absolutely it was a winning environment, a hugely rewarding environment. And I hope that some of the things I've pulled on today have supported some of the issues and challenges that Kartik has explained, and just given you that in a flavor, within the context of a business that has been on this colossal growth trajectory. Pawan.
Thank you, James. Thank you. And just to tell everyone, that James is now is a non-executive director with Pime Shield. So I think all of you should be able to take advantage of it. I'd like to now introduce our third speaker of the day, Colonel Vijay Chadha. Vijay is an alumni of the National Defense Academy and the Indian Military Academy. He was commissioned in 1972, and after serving 20 years in the Indian Army, he took voluntary retirement to step into the corporate world. He did his staff college in Canada and is a postgraduate in defense studies from the Madras University. He held leadership positions as the Chief Operating Officer and the Chief Executive Officer of 4 large corporates in the logistics, travel and tourism industries, namely DHL, Carlson and Wagonly, Kone India, and TUI, that's a German company, from between 1992 and 2008. In 2008, he joined Bharti Foundation as its chief executive officer and continued in this position till 2019. Bharti Foundation is the philanthropic arm of the Bharti Group. He grew the program to 249 schools run and managed by the foundation, having 45,000 children in 6 Indian states. He also established a support program for about 1,000 government schools over 17 Indian states. Presently, Vijay is the Chief Executive Officer of the Air Pollution Action Group, a philanthropic organization designed to assist governments in bringing down pollution levels. He is also the chairman of the managing committee of the Modern School Barakhamba Road, New Delhi, and a member of the governing board of the Bharti Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Vijay Chadha.
Thank you, Pawan, for the introduction. And I am really wondering as to what else do I have to say after two brilliant speakers before me. I mean, Karthik gave a wonderful exposition, which could have been a classroom in the Harvard Business School with regard to leadership and business strategies and how they need to be aligned. James gave a wonderful case study of his own organization and its growth from a mere startup into a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and how important leadership was in actually realizing its aims and the growth of the organization. I'm glad that I don't have a structured presentation because I couldn't understand. All I have is about 50 years of experience. One started life, like Pawan said, in 1972 when we got commissioned into the army, and you were thrust into a leadership role at the age of 20. And almost 50 years down the line, I'm fortunate to be still handling a leadership role. And I've had the experience of actually three diverse fields. The armed forces, and the armed forces all across the world, people in uniform are similar. Then a pure corporate, environment where you are running businesses, and your vision and mission and everything was aligned to actually creating shareholder value, profitability of the business, surviving the environment, and into the social and development sector, which was again such a revelation and learning. So, I mean, and I'm sure even in the audience, many people who are leaders in their own right, who have a lot of experience, doesn't know, one thing. I think it's my exposition informal will be around sharing my experiences and more focused on. Am I audible? Because we are without electricity and I'm only. One, can you hear me?
Yeah, Vijay, your voice is breaking, but just carry on. I think that's okay.
So let me see if I can just go to another direction. Please just give me a moment.
Vijay is in the remote corner of India in the hills, and electricity breakdown, though not common there, but it's happened today.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you
Yes.
are.
Yes, great. Okay. So the electricity just come back and I've got to my Wi-Fi. So I think it will be better. All right. So like I said, I'll just be sharing my experiences and learnings. I've had the singular good fortune of being able to learn all throughout, because working in different environments, running different businesses, and actually it's a no-brainer. Leadership is critical for success, not only in business but in whatever we do. And even in business, we've heard of large corporations. I think Karthik worked with large global corporations. James has spoken about a startup which has grown into a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But there are small businesses, there are medium enterprises, and there are not so large enterprises which people run. And even in whatever we do, whether it be government, whether it be education, whether it be any other field of life, leadership is an essential attribute. So differences, age 20, you get commissioned into the armed forces, you land up in your unit, right? And you land up there with troops, men, junior commissioned officers, people who have had far more experience, battle-scarred veterans, people who've had much more experience than you. And yet, you're supposed to lead your team. Right? It's not only about leading, you're supposed to lead them into battle and at times into certain death. So what is that kind of leadership? Of course, there is the structure of the armed forces. There is a hierarchy. There is a culture which already exists. Right? But yet, as a leader, you have to be accepted by your men. That was my learning. You cannot take your position or your authority for granted. They will say, yes, sir, to whatever you say, to your command. But there is a difference in the kind of yes, sir, which will come once they start respecting you. So the biggest learning that you have is you have to earn the respect of the troops that you command and you lead. And that can happen only by proving that you are worth your salt. We have a structure, so there are traditions in the armed forces. So we are put into training programs along with your troops. You train with them, you play with them, you eat with them, and you gain their confidence. So that is the learning of the armed forces, but it is again a learning process. As a leader, you have a lot of theoretical knowledge because you've come to the training institutions, but the practical experience is what you learn on the job. And there are people who've had far more experience than what you come with. And it's something which works. But as a leader, you've got to people believe that armed forces only authoritarian leadership. And that's not always true. There is a hierarchy. People say, yes, sir. But yet, without actually winning the respect of your troops, without actually proving that you are good enough for them to look up to you, you really cannot be the right kind of leader. And this goes right up the line from a lieutenant, whether you become a general, but the fact that you always have to be accepted and you always have to walk the talk. So that's the armed forces leadership. I mean, there are a lot of givens, but yet there is a lot that you've got to bring to the table to be able to deliver and meet your objective. In business, it's about your organization success. In the armed forces, you don't always go to war, but you have to prepare for war. You got to train. You got to meet various other objectives. And while you're preparing for war, there are so many other activities which happen where you've got to prove your mettle. My transition happened in 1992 after 20 years of being an officer in the armed forces, when I came into the corporate world and was again thrust into a leadership organization in a large Indian organization, which was in 4 different lines of businesses, but had alignments with large multinationals abroad. So the biggest business was DHL, which is now an integrated logistics company. At that time, we used to call it an express company. There was a travel division, a logistics division, and a freight forwarding division. And there I was, fresh out of the army, head of the northern region of this company, which was fairly large in those days, by Indian standards in 1992. It was family managed, but professional. And it was in a transition phase where a lot of management professionals who were qualified from multinationals like Cadbury, like Procter & Gamble, like Coke, etc., had come in. And it was transitioning from a family-run organization into a well-managed multinational corporation. So processes and systems were being introduced. Right? And there I was, not understanding anything about business, and yet in a leadership role. So how does one manage in these kind of situations? When you have to learn from scratch, essentially. So like in the army that you train with the troops. So one started by actually understanding what happens at the lowest level in every business. So in the express business, one did a 7-day induction as a courier boy, going along with the couriers, collecting parcels, taking them to a hub, seeing as to how the entire operations happen in a hub, how shipments are dispatched, go to the airport, look at airport operations, etc. And for every other business also actually learn from ground level. So the learning here was, never believe that as a leader you know everything. There is no harm in saying that you need to learn from scratch. You bring in certain qualities, you bring in your experience, you bring in your understanding of various things, you bring in your ability to manage people, right? But yet you need to understand and learn each business. And when you say that you need to learn, and when you ask questions, when you say that, sorry, I don't know this, can you explain it in more detail? Don't think that people will stop respecting you. Possibly they will respect you more. So what comes out here is honesty of purpose, the desire to learn. And it doesn't take very long to learn at that stage in life. So as a leader, learning is an essential process. Always believe that there are specialists who know more than you. Every CEO would understand every aspect of business. But every CEO is not the best marketing person, is not the best finance person, is not the best technology person. So another learning is, as a leader, make sure that you have the best that is possible under these circumstances to lead your functions. Delegate, empower them, allow them to perform, right? And have faith and trust. The biggest learning has been that trust is critical. Trust is what drives, people when you have faith, and that is what actually enables execution. We devise business strategies, we formulate plans, but ultimately it's about execution, because I think Mr. Rana covered it when he gave those two examples with the inverted commas. Right? It's how you actually execute your action plan on ground, when the strategy translates into action, and how people down the line execute. The larger the organization, the more complex it gets. In a smaller organization, you can still oversee. But in a large organization, you can review, you can have checks and balances in place, but the ultimate execution happens on ground. It's your frontline leadership which is actually going to get you the results. And if they fail, it becomes very difficult actually to achieve your aim. So that was another learning. Always be open to feedback. Accept what you don't know and learn. Get the strengths of everyone. I mean, to actually make an organization succeed, you got to be, as a leader, be able to harness the strengths of each individual, of each function within the organization, and get them aligned to achieving organizational goals.
We did 3 minutes more, please.
Okay, right. So I think that was key. In my corporate experience, I had the challenge or good fortune to actually manage 2 turnarounds, right? And all this happened because you took the team along. So without taking your team along, you can't get success. The transition from corporate to the social sector was again very different. In the armed forces, you took a lot of things for granted. You thought, you were an officer, you were great, you were respected. And, we surely took a lot of things for granted. And there was a sense of pride, but it was not always, the sensitivity, the need of what society requires was not always there. In business, you were driven by organizational goals, by shareholder value, right? And yet, of course, today businesses have become very sensitive. There is CSR, there's social responsibility. We talk about, businesses being, aligned to understanding the needs of the environment, the needs of people. But when you transition to the social sector, you realize that there is much more to life than achieving goals. I mean, even there, whichever organization you run, there is an objective, there are goals that you have to achieve. But again, it has to come in from people. It's people on the ground who are going to deliver results. It's people on ground who have to be motivated. The leader has to have the ability to inspire his team, to motivate them constantly, to generate trust and faith. And more importantly, is everyone has spoken about it, is create the right kind of culture in an organization. Culture is critical. I think what the example of Mr. Azim Premji, the simplicity, the culture that is there in Wipro, his company, and the Azim Premji Foundation is something that people have to learn from. The desire to give in the foundation, the way they achieve results in the company, in the business organization, and the amalgamation of both. So I think that is very important. And the last thought that I want to leave, I think there's very little time, is that as a leader, always remember that the most important thing that you carry with you is your credibility as a leader. Don't ever believe that anything can be hidden from people who report to you or for people who are frontline workers or down the line in the organization. You are far more transparent than what you would like to believe. People down the line generally know much more than what you think they do. So always make sure that you're honest, you're transparent, empathy is critical, and credibility and fairness. Never make a rule which you have to change for people. And that's another learning of leadership. Because you've got to be consistent. When you make exceptions, there has to be very, very valid and credible reasons to actually make exceptions. So every organization needs to have systems and processes, needs to have rules and regulations, needs to have teamwork, and of course, more importantly, a strong organizational culture. And as a leader, you've got to create the desire to win, to achieve, to obtain and attain your mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you very much. We have time for a couple of questions, and the first question goes out to General Sanjeev Chachra. Please ask your question, sir.
I think after such outstanding speakers, another military man's view, let me just take Karthik Raina's word culture. The culture of the armed forces is ethos, integrity, elan, and the winning ability. And we've always believed in the armed forces that, while technology and weapons are important, it is actually won by the men who actually follow. The spirit of the men who follow and the spirit of the man who leads is the most important that actually brings victory. We have a huge armed forces, huge human resource organization, and it's a challenge to actually get the best out of every one of them. And today, the winds of change have actually also brought it into the armed forces. Social media, the information technology, education has had its impact. And today, you are dealing with highly knowledgeable, very skilled subordinates who may or may not always believe or share your views. And therefore, the leadership strategies is actually undergoing a change to be more adaptive, more interactive, more participative, and yet decisive when the time comes for leadership. How does this change coming into the corporate world, and how does the corporate world manage this change, which I'm sure is also being felt there?
Karthik, would you like to take this question on?
Yeah, no, certainly. In fact, I will give you an answer, which was a statement by Eisenhower, who is an army man himself.
Yes.
He gives this brilliant definition of leadership, and I think that's for all time. He says, leadership is getting someone else to do what you want done because he wants to do it. And I think that is the essence that the corporate world also follows. I mean, I used to head the sales network of GSK, a company in which we had 758 salespeople. And they were all over. At the end of the day, creating that feeling in them that they contribute, we used to follow what is called as the 24-48 principle. All of us sit in air-conditioned offices with an average temperature of 24. All the guys in the field operate with an average temperature of 48. The day the 24 people begin to know what it is like to deliver under 48, and then show, if you remember, I ended with this statement called empathy, which is so vastly different from sympathy. So I think most corporate organizations work on that principle. And when you go for, I mean, the example that James gave, I think it was classic. I mean, he's not only talking of one country, he's talking of across different countries. And therefore, to me, the focus is very much on getting them the ownership and getting them sufficiently motivated. And it's not only through money. Money in today's world is very transient. I always say that. You get an increment in April, everybody is excited. From May, it is normal salary. So it has an expiry date. Therefore, I think personality, Vijayji talked about it very, very, I think, strongly. And that's very true. So most corporates spend a lot of time. There's a lot of feedback mechanisms that are in place. And they need to. And the last point I'll talk about is social media. Yes, social media is causing issues because social media has as much of nonsense in it as it has good sense. As a result of which, one of the major tasks today in the private sector is to control rumors. And I remember one of my clients, because now I don't work in an organization, but I advise. One of my clients had a problem because somebody had indicated that there is a problem with the product that they are selling and that product creates impotency. There's no truth in it. And the biggest challenge was that everybody from the sales force, field force came running and said, "Sir, is this true?" And you were trying to prove something which didn't need to be proved. It was a challenge. So social media is definitely an area that we get into. Not saying that you succeed, but a lot of effort is going in that direction. I think a lot more of tactical firefighting is nowadays done compared to what was when I started my career in 1974. I don't know, Sanjeev ji, if I've been able to answer your question.
Thank you. I got time for just one more question, and the next question goes out to Dr. John Chinatra. John, are you there?
Yeah, I'm very much here, sir.
We can't see you.
Sir, my video has been stopped by the control, sir.
Okay. Carry on,
That's my
please.
question anyway. My question is, this relationship between business strategy and leadership strategy, how much does the importance of this change in a typical turnaround situation? Why I'm asking this question is I've had a little experience in turnaround situations. I believe that this changes drastically when compared to a stable, mature business environment. And I believe that this relationship makes the difference between the success of a turnaround and the failure of a turnaround. What is your opinion?
Vijay, would you like to take this on?
Certainly, I think Dr. John has answered the question. I mean, obviously, every business situation is different. You know, when you're running an organization which is stable, which is possibly one of the market leaders, you know, then the challenges differ. Leadership is still required. When you're looking at a turnaround, you know, you possibly require transformational leadership because there are a lot of steps that you have to take to actually revive the business. It could be both human resources related as well as business decisions related. So first is you need to create a new strategy for the turnaround. You may have to take, like my personal experience, you know, there was an existing organization which was over 50 years old, and there was a culture which was existing, and there was a way of doing business. So you had to actually go deep down and start changing things. You had to cut down the size, so you got to downsize. You have to close down offices. You got to, exit people, which is not always easy. People who are comfortable, people who have taken their jobs for granted, not because it's their fault, because that was the organizational culture. They were being accepted and the work was going on. And suddenly a new company comes and takes over and says, we need better business results. We need a leaner organization. So definitely the leadership style would need to be different, but that doesn't change the basis that there is an alignment which is necessary with both, business strategies and leadership strategies. And that keeps changing from situation to situation.
All right. Thank you very much, Vijay. I think I don't have time to ask the other speakers for their comments because we're running out of time, and I'd like to hand the proceedings back to the president. Mr. C. Palse.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have hardly any time, but I'd like to say a few words. Raina's presentation was very, very well structured, very well structured. He has, in the end, tried to tell us how alignment between the business and leadership should be, that A, B, C, D, beautiful laid down, what are the points to consider. His emphasis on empathy, I'll also like to add that he's absolutely right. It's not a question of sympathy. Empathy is that you have to go into the mind or the feelings of the other person and then ask him to do something. If he has a doubt, don't think that he is doubting your leadership. Empathy is entirely a different cup of tea than sympathy. So it's very nicely said that empathy, and we have been discussing on empathy in one of our webinars when we said how you look at the problem is the problem in any business. How you look at the problem is the problem. As far as very nice case study on Data. And the main emphasis, which I like to say, is that he said the leaders were selected ultimately not on the basis of qualifications, but intrinsically they were found that what are the qualities they have, and hence the leaders were selected. He has clearly mentioned that the leadership selection was not based on the basis of qualification. And he has also said that there can be some frictions somewhere. Obviously, the leader has to resolve these frictions. He has also emphasized on the strong functional pipeline, which I said in my opening test. There's a strong functional pipeline of persons which have to be created by a leader. And the last presentation by Mr. Chedda was from his heart and his experience. Absolutely eloquent, though extempore and eloquent. He clearly, on the basis of his experience, has tried to emphasize that how the leadership qualities which he acquired, learned, or imbibed during his service career in the army are applicable in the organization also, with little bit modification here and there. All the three speakers have done wonderful, have delivered wonderful deliberations. We are very, very thankful to all of them for having made us more wise, not wiser, but little more wise than what we are, and wisest is not the emphasis. Everything was absolutely immaculate, and I'm thankful to the speaker. Next is that our next webinar is, Pooja, give me the banner. Hiring and firing, a risky business in today's era. And it is due on the 9th of July, 6 p.m. This is a very interesting subject we have selected, and I am sure that all the delegates who are present here, they will note the time and the date and join us in this webinar. The second part, which I like to emphasize, is that we, after having received a thumping response for many countries, delegates from many countries to our webinar, we have started now a series of interactive sessions under the caption Understand and Be Understood. Understand and Be Understood. This is the first in the interactive series. our first interactive session is being organized on 30th June, and it is on the subject that travel risk management implementation, a proactive approach. In this case, there will be free flow of question, free without any inhibition. The delegates will be asking the question. It will be free flow of communication between the speakers and the delegates present there. This is a session where only one speaker is going to speak. That is about 15 to 20 minutes. The rest of the time is left for interaction and intercommunication so that we understand or they understand and they are also understood. Therefore, we have captioned this as the subject is new series, understand and be understood. The delegates will be at liberty to ask any question. There can be also interflow of communication between the delegates. A moderator will also intervene, and basically the base discussions will revolve around the travel risk management implementation, a proactive approach. I'm sure this particular series will also prove quite, I'm sure, popular, and the people, the delegates, and the scholars will come forward and make it a success. Thank you very much, everyone. And this is due on the 30th. That is, first is the interactive on the 30th June, and the next webinar is on 9th. That is in the July. So immediately after this webinar, which we are now in, we are going to have this travel risk management interactive approach. There's a very, very interesting thing which we're going to have. And I am sure, sir, that passage of time, we will like to have some of you in this interactive session also, because we are sure Mr. Raina, Mr. Chadha, and James will be able to deliver much better than they have been in this limited frame of time. We had given them only 15 minutes. That session will be about 1 hour, and 1 hour you will interact with the delegates, and we will request and approach you as and when we have interactive session concerning your subject. Thank you very much, all the learned speakers. Thank you very much, all the delegates who have joined from various countries. And thank you very much, NISWA team, who has presented this beautifully, timely, and exactly to the design. And thank you, Mr. Chairman Pawanji, for giving me an opportunity to get this session through. Thank you very much, everyone.
I'd like to say thank you to everybody who's been here. And thank you, James. Thank you, Karthik. Thank you, Vijay, for an excellent work you've done today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Right, sir. Bye-bye, sir. Good night. Great. Enjoyed every bit of it, sir. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Everyone. Thank you, sir. Thank you. How are you, Sipal, sir? Sipal, sir?
Sir, Saprasa.
Yeah, good evening.
Thanks everybody. Wonderful experience.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Then Mehta, I hope you liked it. I hope you liked it.
Wonderful. It was very interesting. Now, if I show you my foot, I think everyone is left. I can show you my foot. You have to make this plastered.
Okay, bye. Bye-bye.
No, it was excellent learning. Right, sir.
Right.
Thanks.